The blood on Mayor Vernon Blackthorne's boots was still wet when Teresa Fleming looked up from the ledger she was balancing and saw him standing over the body of Jacob Hartwell, the newspaper editor who had been threatening to expose corruption in Telluride for months. It was March 1883, and the Colorado mountain town was caught between the promise of silver riches and the grip of men who would kill to control it. Teresa had stayed late at the printing office to help Jacob finish the payroll calculations, a favor she did twice a month since she had a head for numbers. And now she stood frozen behind the counter as the mayor's cold eyes met hers through the dim lamplight. "Miss Fleming," Blackthorne said, his voice smooth as silk despite the smoking revolver in his hand, "I did not expect anyone else to be here." Teresa's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 22 years old, had lived in Telluride her entire life, and had never seen a man killed before. Jacob lay on the floor near the printing press, his eyes staring at nothing, a dark stain spreading across his vest. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. "He was going to print lies about me," Blackthorne continued, stepping over Jacob's body as if it were nothing more than an obstacle. "Lies that would have destroyed everything I have built in this town. You understand, do not you, Miss Fleming? Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good." Teresa's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. Her mind raced through possibilities. The mayor was not alone. Through the window, she could see two of his men standing guard outside, their rifles glinting in the moonlight. Sheriff Dawson was in Blackthorne's pocket. Everyone knew it, and without Jacob's evidence, without his newspaper to rally the honest people of Telluride, there was no one to stand against the mayor's corruption. "I will not tell anyone," Teresa heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant and strange to her own ears. Blackthorne studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "I wish I could believe that, my dear. I truly do. But you have always been friends with Hartwell here, and I cannot take the risk that your conscience might get the better of you." He raised the revolver again. Teresa did not think. She grabbed the heavy ledger and hurled it at the lamp on the counter. Glass shattered, oil splashed across the wooden surface, and flames erupted with a hungry roar. Blackthorne cursed and stumbled backward as fire raced across the counter and caught the stacks of newsprint. Teresa ran for the back door, her skirts tangling around her legs as smoke began to fill the room. She burst into the alley behind the printing office and heard shouting behind her. The night air was cold against her face as she ran, her button-up boots slipping on the muddy ground. She had no plan, only the desperate need to survive. The residential streets of Telluride were mostly dark at this late hour, but she did not dare go home. Blackthorne would send his men there within minutes. Teresa cut through alleys and between buildings, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear horses and voices behind her getting closer. The town was small, and there were only so many places to hide. She thought of the church, but Father O'Brien was old and frail, and she would not bring violence to his doorstep. She thought of her friend Margaret's house, but Margaret had 3 young children, and Teresa could not endanger them either. The livery stable loomed ahead, and Teresa made a split-second decision. She slipped through the side door and pressed herself against the wall, trying to quiet her breathing. Horses stamped and snorted in their stalls, disturbed by the intrusion. In the darkness, she could make out saddles and tack hanging on the walls and a ladder leading up to the hayloft. "Check every building," she heard a man's voice call from the street. "The mayor wants her found tonight." Teresa climbed the ladder as quietly as she could and burrowed into the hay, pulling it over herself. Her whole body shook, and tears streamed down her face, but she pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle any sound. She heard the stable door creak open below, heard footsteps and the creak of leather as someone moved through the space. "Nothing down here," a voice called out. She must have kept running. The footsteps retreated, and Teresa lay in the hay for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. Her mind kept returning to Jacob's lifeless eyes, to the casual way Blackthorne had spoken about murdering him. Jacob had been a good man, a brave man, and now he was dead because he had tried to stand up for what was right. When the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the gaps in the stable walls, Teresa finally moved. Her body was stiff and cold, hay stuck in her dark hair and to her dress. She climbed down from the loft and peered out the stable door. The street was empty except for a few early risers heading to work. She could see smoke still rising from what was left of the newspaper office several blocks away. Teresa knew she could not stay in Telluride. Blackthorne would not stop looking for her, and even if she managed to hide for a while, eventually someone would spot her and word would get back to the mayor. She needed to leave, needed to get far away, but she had no horse, no supplies, and only the clothes on her back. She was standing there trying to form a plan when she heard a voice behind her say, "You look like you have had a rough night." Teresa spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood in one of the stalls, his hands held up in a peaceful gesture. He was tall and lean, probably around 25 or 26 years old, with dark hair that fell past his collar and gray eyes that studied her with concern. He wore dusty range clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, and there was something solid and steady about him that made Teresa's panic ease just slightly. "I did not mean to startle you," he said. "I am Garrett Jackson. I rode in late last night and decided to sleep in the stable rather than pay for a hotel room. Are you all right? You look like you have been through something terrible." Teresa's first instinct was to run, but something in Garrett's expression stopped her. There was kindness there and genuine worry, and she realized with a sinking feeling that she desperately needed help. "I am Teresa Fleming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I am in serious trouble." Garrett stepped out of the stall, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. Now that she could see him better in the growing light, she noticed the worn revolver on his hip and the rope burns on his hands that marked him as a working cowboy. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was something gentle in the way he looked at her. "What kind of trouble?" he asked. Teresa hesitated. She did not know this man, had never seen him before in her life. But what choice did she have? "I witnessed something last night, something bad, and now there are men looking for me, men who want to make sure I never tell anyone what I saw." Garrett's expression grew serious. "How bad are we talking?" "Murder," Teresa said, and saying the word aloud made it real in a way that sent a fresh wave of horror through her. "The mayor of this town murdered the newspaper editor, and I saw it happen." Garrett let out a low whistle. "That is bad trouble indeed." He studied her for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "I have a horse and supplies. I was planning to move on from Telluride today anyway. If you need to get out of town, I can help you." "Why would you help me?" Teresa asked, suspicious despite her desperation. "You do not even know me." "I know you are scared and in danger," Garrett said simply. "And I know what it is like when powerful men think they can get away with anything. I have seen it too many times in too many towns. Besides, I can tell by looking at you that you are not the kind of woman who gets mixed up in trouble for no good reason." Teresa felt tears prick at her eyes again. "I do not have any money to pay you. I do not have anything except what I am wearing." "I am not asking for payment," Garrett said. "But we need to move fast if those men are still looking for you. Can you ride?" "Yes," Teresa said. She had learned to ride as a girl, though it had been some time since she had been on a horse. "Good." Garrett moved to one of the stalls and began saddling a sturdy-looking bay gelding. "We will head south toward the San Miguel River, then cut east through the mountains. It will be rough going, but it will be harder for anyone to track us that way." As Garrett worked, Teresa watched the street through a crack in the stable door. Her mind was reeling. Less than 12 hours ago, she had been living her normal, quiet life, working as a bookkeeper for several businesses in town, living in the small house her parents had left her when they died of influenza 5 years earlier. Now she was a fugitive, preparing to flee into the wilderness with a stranger. "I cannot believe this is happening," she said, more to herself than to Garrett. "I know it is overwhelming," Garrett said, tightening the cinch on his saddle. "But right now, you need to focus on staying alive. Everything else can be sorted out later." "What if they follow us? What if they catch up?" Garrett paused in his work and looked at her directly. "I will not let anyone hurt you," he said, and there was such certainty in his voice that Teresa found herself believing him. He finished preparing his horse, then helped Teresa climb up behind the saddle. She wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of how improper this was, how scandalous it would be considered for an unmarried woman to ride this way with a man she had just met. But propriety seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. They slipped out of the stable through the back entrance, and Garrett guided his horse down a narrow path that led away from the main street. Teresa looked back at Telluride, at the only home she had ever known, and wondered if she would ever see it again. The town was waking up now, smoke rising from chimneys, people beginning their daily routines. Did they know yet that Jacob was dead? Did they know that she was being hunted? Garrett kept the horse at a steady walk until they were clear of the town, then urged it into a trot. The mountain air was crisp and cold, and Teresa shivered in her thin dress. Garrett must have felt it because he slowed the horse and shrugged out of his coat, handing it back to her. "Put this on," he said. "It will be colder as we climb higher." Teresa pulled on the coat, grateful for its warmth and the smell of leather and sage that clung to it. They rode in silence for a while, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the mountainside. After an hour, Garrett stopped the horse near a small stream. "We will rest here for a few minutes," he said, helping Teresa down. "The horse needs water and we should eat something." Teresa's legs were shaky when her feet touched the ground. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and her stomach was hollow with hunger and fear. Garrett pulled some dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebags and offered them to her. The food was tough and bland, but Teresa ate it gratefully. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. I know you did not have to help me." Garrett shrugged. "Like I said, it is the right thing to do." He studied her for a moment. "Do you have any family or friends in other towns?" "Somewhere you can go." Teresa shook her head. "My parents are dead. I have an aunt in Denver, but I have not seen her in years. I do not even know if she still lives at the same address." "Denver is a long way from here," Garrett said. "But it is big enough that you could disappear if you needed to. What about this mayor? How far do you think his reach extends?" "I do not know," Teresa admitted. "He owns the mine and half the businesses in Telluride. He has connections to people in the territorial government. But I do not know if he has the resources to track someone across Colorado." Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have a ranch about 2 days' ride from here, near the Uncompahgre River. It is not much, just a small spread with a cabin and some grazing land, but it is remote. You would be safe there while we figure out what to do next." "You have been very kind," Teresa said carefully, "but I cannot impose on you like that. You have already done so much." "You would not be imposing," Garrett said. "The ranch has been sitting empty for the past few months while I have been working cattle drives. To be honest, It would be good to have someone there, to make sure squatters have not moved in or the roof has not caved in. He paused, then added, "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. We just met a few hours ago, but I give you my word that I mean you no harm. I just want to help you get somewhere safe." Teresa looked at him, at his honest gray eyes and the open expression on his face. Every instinct she had told her that this man was genuine, that he truly did want to help her. And what choice did she have? She could not go back to Telluride, could not risk traveling alone across the mountains with no supplies or protection. "All right," she said. "I will come to your ranch, but I will pay you back somehow once I have the chance. I am good with numbers and bookkeeping. I can help you manage your accounts or whatever you need." A small smile tugged at the corner of Garrett's mouth. "We can talk about that later. For now, let us focus on putting more distance between us and Telluride." They rode through the day, following trails that Garrett seemed to know by instinct. He was a skilled horseman, Teresa noticed, guiding his horse over rough terrain with ease and constantly watching their surroundings for any signs of pursuit. Around midday, they stopped again to rest the horse and eat more of the dried provisions from Garrett's supplies. "Tell me about this mayor," Garrett said as they sat in the shade of a large pine tree. "What made him kill the newspaper editor?" Teresa took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. Jacob Hartwell, the editor, had been investigating corruption in Telluride for months. He discovered that Mayor Blackthorne was skimming money from the mine's payroll, bribing territorial officials, and using violence to intimidate anyone who stood against him. Jacob was planning to publish everything in a special edition of the newspaper. He told me he had documents, proof of everything Blackthorne had done. And the mayor found out, he must have. Jacob was always careful, but Blackthorne has spies everywhere. Teresa's voice shook. "I was just there to help with the bookkeeping. I never thought I would see something like that. Jacob was a good man. He deserved better than to be shot down like an animal." Garrett reached out and gently touched her hand. "I am sorry you had to witness that, and I am sorry about your friend." The simple kindness of the gesture made Teresa's eyes fill with tears again. What if Blackthorne gets away with it? What if no one ever knows the truth about what he has done? "Right now, your safety is what matters most," Garrett said. "But once you are secure, we can think about how to get justice for your friend. Maybe there are territorial marshals who could investigate, people beyond Blackthorne's reach." "Maybe," Teresa said, though she did not feel particularly hopeful. They continued riding through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The landscape was breathtaking, all towering peaks and deep valleys, but Teresa was too exhausted and frightened to fully appreciate it. She clung to Garrett's waist as the horse picked its way along narrow trails, trying not to think about how far they would fall if the animal lost its footing. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Garrett guided the horse into a sheltered hollow surrounded by rock formations. "We will camp here tonight," he said. "It is hidden from the trail, and we can see anyone approaching from below." He helped Teresa down from the horse, and she stood on wobbly legs while he unsaddled the animal and set up a simple camp. He had a bedroll and a small pot for cooking, and he built a fire using deadwood he gathered from the surrounding area. Teresa watched him work, noticing the efficient way he moved, how comfortable he seemed in the wilderness. "You have done this many times before," she observed. "I have spent most of my life on the trail," Garrett said, coaxing the fire to life. "I was born in Texas, but my family moved to Colorado when I was young. My father was a cattleman, and I learned the trade from him. After he died, I worked for various ranches, drove cattle up to Wyoming and Montana, saved my money and bought my own place about 3 years ago." Do you have other family? Teresa asked. A sister in Kansas. She married a shopkeeper there. We write to each other a few times a year. Garrett pulled out some beans and bacon from his supplies and began preparing a simple meal. What about you? What was your life like in Telluride before all this happened? Teresa sat down near the fire, grateful for its warmth. Quiet. Ordinary. I worked as a bookkeeper for the mercantile, the hotel, and a few other businesses. I kept Jacob's books too, which is why I was at the newspaper office last night. I had a small house, a few friends. I went to church on Sundays and helped with the charity bazaar every fall. She laughed bitterly. It sounds so boring when I say it like that, but I was content. It was a good life. It sounds like a peaceful life, Garrett said. There is nothing wrong with that. They ate the beans and bacon straight from the pot, passing it back and forth between them. It was the best thing Teresa had ever tasted, though that might have been because she was so hungry. After they finished eating, Garrett cleaned the pot with sand and water from his canteen, then spread out his bedroll. You take this, he said. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take your bedding, Teresa protested. You need it more than I do, Garrett said firmly. I have slept under the stars more times than I can count. One more night will not hurt me. Teresa was too exhausted to argue. She lay down on the bedroll and pulled Garrett's coat over herself like a blanket. The ground was hard beneath her, and every muscle in her body ached from the long day of riding. But within minutes, she was asleep. She woke several times during the night, startled by strange sounds or nightmares about Mayor Blackthorne. Each time she saw Garrett sitting by the fire, keeping watch, and the sight of him there made her feel safe enough to drift back to sleep. When dawn broke, they ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit, then continued their journey. The second day of riding was even harder than the first. Teresa's muscles screamed in protest, and blisters formed on her hands from gripping Garrett's waist. But she did not complain. Garrett checked on her frequently, making sure she was all right, offering her water and words of encouragement. We are making good time, he said as they paused to rest the horse around midday. We should reach the ranch by late afternoon. What is it like? Teresa asked. Your ranch? Small, Garrett admitted. About 200 acres of grazing land with a creek running through it. The cabin is one room, but it is solid. I built it myself when I first bought the property. There is a barn for the horse and a chicken coop, though I do not know if the chickens are still around. I have been gone for nearly 3 months. What were you doing in Telluride? I was part of a crew driving cattle from New Mexico up to the railroad in Durango. After we finished, I decided to spend a few days in Telluride before heading home. I had heard the saloon there served decent whiskey. He glanced back at her with a slight smile. Lucky for you I did. Lucky for me, Teresa agreed softly. They rode on, and gradually the landscape began to change. The steep mountains gave way to rolling hills and grassland. Teresa could see the Uncompahgre River in the distance, a ribbon of silver cutting through the valley. Despite everything that had happened, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she could build a life here, far from Telluride and Mayor Blackthorne. Maybe she could find peace again. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Garrett guided the horse through a stand of cottonwood trees, and suddenly there it was, his ranch. The cabin was indeed small, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. The barn was modest but sturdy, and Teresa could see what must have once been a vegetable garden, now overgrown with weeds. The whole place had an air of loneliness about it, as if it had been waiting for someone to come home. It is not much to look at, Garrett said, sounding almost apologetic. But it is mine and it is home. It is beautiful, Teresa said, and she meant it. After 2 days on the run, constantly looking over her shoulder in fear, the little ranch felt like a sanctuary. Garrett helped her down from the horse, then led the animal into the barn. Teresa followed, watching as he removed the saddle and bridle and began rubbing down the tired gelding. "Thank you, old friend," he murmured to the horse. "You did good work these past few days." The affection in his voice made Teresa smile. This was a man who cared for his animals, who understood the value of hard work and loyalty. She found herself wondering about him, about what had made him into the kind of person who would risk his own safety to help a stranger. After tending to the horse, Garrett led Teresa to the cabin. He had to put his shoulder against the door to force it open, the wood swollen from months of weather. Inside, everything was covered in dust, and there was a musty smell of disuse, but it was clean and organized. There was a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove for cooking and shelves lined with supplies. A washstand stood near the door and a rifle hung above the fireplace. "I will get a fire going," Garrett said. "It will be cold tonight. There should be some blankets in that chest over there if you want to shake them out." They spent the next hour making the cabin livable again. Garrett built a fire in both the stove and the fireplace, while Teresa cleaned and swept, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She found the blankets he had mentioned, along with some spare clothes that she eyed longingly. Her dress was filthy and torn from their journey through the mountains. Garrett must have noticed her looking because he said, "I have some old shirts that might fit you, and there are a few things that belong to my mother in that trunk. She was about your size. You are welcome to wear whatever you need." "Thank you," Teresa said. "I hate to impose further, but I would like to wash up if possible." "Of course. There is a creek about 50 yards behind the cabin. The water will be cold, but it is clean. I will heat some water on the stove so you can at least wash your face and hands here first." Garrett moved toward the door. "I need to check the fence lines before it gets too dark. Will you be all right here by yourself for a bit?" Teresa nodded, though the thought of being alone made her anxious. Garrett seemed to sense this because he paused and said, "You are safe here, Teresa. We are miles from the nearest town, and no one knows about this place except me. But if it makes you feel better, that rifle is loaded, and there is a shotgun behind the door. Do you know how to use them?" "My father taught me to shoot when I was young," Teresa said. "I am not an expert, but I can manage if I need to." "Hopefully it will not come to that," Garrett said, "but it is good to be prepared." After he left, Teresa heated water on the stove and used it to wash the worst of the dirt and grime from her face and hands. Then she explored the trunk and found a simple cotton dress that had belonged to Garrett's mother, along with some undergarments and a warm shawl. She changed quickly, feeling more human in clean clothes, though everything hung a bit loosely on her frame. By the time Garrett returned, she had managed to prepare a simple meal using supplies she found in the cabin: canned beans, some dried corn, and biscuits made from flour and water. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling. "This is wonderful," Garrett said as they sat at the table together. "I have been eating nothing but trail food for months. A home-cooked meal, even a simple one, is a real treat." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, then Garrett said, "I have been thinking about your situation, about what we should do next." Teresa's stomach tightened with anxiety. "What do you mean?" "You cannot hide here forever," Garrett said gently. "Eventually, you are going to want to reclaim your life, to stop running. But to do that, we need to find a way to expose what Mayor Blackthorne did. To get justice for your friend and make sure Blackthorne cannot hurt anyone else." "How?" Teresa asked. "He is too powerful. He owns the sheriff, probably half the territorial government. Even if I went to the authorities, who would believe me over him?" "We need evidence," Garrett said. You said your friend had documents, proof of Blackthorne's corruption. Do you know where he might have kept them? Teresa thought back to her conversations with Jacob. He mentioned a safe in his office, but that building burned down. Everything in it must have been destroyed. Maybe. But maybe he was smart enough to keep copies somewhere else. Did he have any close friends or family? His sister lives in our array, Teresa said slowly. He visited her once a month. I suppose it is possible he left something with her for safekeeping. Our array is not too far from here, Garrett said. A day's ride, maybe. We could go there, see if we can find his sister and ask her. If we can get those documents, we can take them to the territorial marshal in Denver. That is far enough from Telluride that Blackthorne's influence should not reach. It sounds dangerous, Teresa said. What if someone recognizes me? What if Blackthorne has men looking for us? It is a risk, Garrett admitted, but staying hidden forever is not really living, and your friend Jacob died trying to expose the truth. Do you not think we owe it to him to finish what he started? Teresa felt tears prick at her eyes. Garrett was right, she knew he was. Jacob had been brave enough to stand up to corruption and violence, and she had the chance to make sure his death meant something. But she was terrified, and she had already seen firsthand what Blackthorne was capable of. Tell me when you are ready, Garrett said softly. I will not push you into anything. You have been through a terrible ordeal and you need time to recover and feel safe. But when you are ready, when you feel strong enough, I will help you see this through. I promise you that. The kindness in his voice, the patience and understanding, touched something deep in Teresa's heart. She looked at him across the table, at this man who had risked everything to help her, who was offering to risk even more to help her get justice for Jacob, and she felt something shift inside her. It was not just gratitude, though there was plenty of that. It was something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken when she met his eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have found a way, Garrett said. You are stronger than you think, Teresa Fleming. That night, Teresa lay in Garrett's bed while he made himself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. She stared at the rough ceiling beams, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of Garrett's breathing, and felt safer than she had since the moment she saw Jacob fall. But she also felt confused. Her whole life had been turned upside down in a matter of days. She was a fugitive, dependent on the charity of a man she barely knew, and yet somehow, lying there in that small cabin, she felt more alive than she had in years. The next few days fell into a pattern. Garrett worked on repairing the ranch, fixing broken fence posts and cleaning out the barn, while Teresa tended to the cabin and tried to make it feel more like a home. She found some seeds in a jar and planted a new vegetable garden, pulling weeds and turning the soil until her hands were raw. The physical work felt good, helped quiet the nightmares that plagued her sleep. They talked as they worked, sharing stories about their lives. Teresa learned that Garrett's mother had died when he was 15, and his father had followed 2 years later after being thrown from a horse. She learned that he had once been engaged to a girl in Texas, but that she had broken it off when she realized she did not want to be a rancher's wife, wanted a softer life in the city instead. Teresa told him about her childhood in Telluride, about her parents who had run a small bakery until the influenza epidemic swept through the town. She told him about her friendship with Jacob, how he had been like an older brother to her, always looking out for her welfare. As the days passed, Teresa began to notice small things about Garrett that made her heart beat faster. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled the animals, the quiet strength in his hands when he helped her lift something heavy. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the line of his shoulders, the way the sun caught in his dark hair. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation for his help with something deeper. But late at night, lying alone in the bed that smelled like him, she could not deny the truth. She was falling in love with Garrett Jackson. A week after they arrived at the ranch, Teresa was washing dishes after supper when Garrett came up behind her and gently touched her shoulder. She turned to find him standing closer than he usually stood, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Teresa," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I have been trying to keep my distance," Garrett said. "You have been through something terrible and you are vulnerable, and I did not want to take advantage of that. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." He took a breath. "I care about you, more than I should after such a short time. When I am with you, I feel something I have not felt in a long time, maybe ever, and I needed you to know that." Teresa stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Garrett, I feel the same way. I have been trying trying to convince myself it was just gratitude, but it is more than that. You make me feel safe and cherished. You make me feel like myself again, even after everything that has happened." Garrett reached up and cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I know the circumstances are not ideal," he said. "I know you are still healing, still frightened, but I want you to know that you have a place here with me for as long as you want it. Not as a guest or someone I am helping, but as someone I care deeply about." "I want that too," Teresa whispered. Garrett leaned down and kissed her, and it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Teresa wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like she had finally found something she had been searching for her whole life without even knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably talk about what happens next," Garrett said. "About our Ray and Jacob's sister and getting justice for what happened." "I know," Teresa said, "and I have been thinking about it. I want to go to our Ray. I want to find whatever evidence Jacob left behind and take it to the authorities. Not just for him, but for everyone in Telluride who is suffering under Blackthorne's corruption." She took a breath. "I am ready, or at least I am as ready as I am ever going to be." "We will go together," Garrett said, "and we will be careful. I will not let anything happen to you." They spent the next day preparing for the journey. Garrett cleaned and loaded both his revolver and the rifle, and Teresa helped him pack supplies: food, water, blankets, ammunition. She felt a mixture of fear and determination. This was dangerous, possibly even foolish, but it was the right thing to do. They left early the following morning, riding double on Garrett's horse once again. The journey to our Ray took them through some of the most spectacular scenery in Colorado. High mountain passes where snow still clung to the peaks even in late March, and valleys filled with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Teresa would have enjoyed it immensely. As it was, she could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that danger lurked around every bend in the trail. But nothing happened. They saw a few other travelers, some miners heading to the camps and a family in a wagon, but no one paid them any particular attention. As the sun began to set, the town of Auray came into view, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. "We will find a hotel," Garrett said. "Get a room and figure out how to locate Jacob's sister." "Do you remember her name?" "Sarah Hartwell Kemp," Teresa said. "She is married to a man named William Kemp. I think Jacob said he ran a hardware store." They found a modest hotel on the main street and checked in, Garrett signing the register as Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. Teresa felt her cheeks heat at the presumption, but she understood the necessity. It would be safer for her to be seen as a married woman traveling with her husband than as a single woman with an unrelated man. Their room was small but clean, with a double bed and a washstand. After they had settled in, Garrett went out to ask around about William Kemp's hardware store while Teresa stayed behind, too nervous about being recognized to venture into the street. She paced the room, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Garrett returned within an hour, looking pleased. "The hardware store is 3 streets over," he said. "The hotel clerk said William Kemp is well respected in town, and his wife Sarah is active in the church. We can go there first thing tomorrow morning." That night, they lay together in the hotel bed, both fully clothed and maintaining a careful distance despite the feelings they had confessed to each other. Teresa could not sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. What if Sarah did not have the documents? What if Jacob had not told his sister anything? What if this entire journey was for nothing? "Stop worrying," Garrett murmured in the darkness. "I can hear you thinking from here." "I cannot help it," Teresa admitted. "What if we are wrong? What if there is no evidence?" "Then we will figure out another plan," Garrett said. "But we will not know until we try." In the morning, they walked to Kemp's hardware together. The store was larger than Teresa had expected, with shelves stocked with tools, nails, rope, and every other supply a mining town might need. A man in his 40s stood behind the counter, helping a customer. When he finished, Garrett approached him. "Excuse me, are you William Kemp?" "I am," the man said pleasantly. "What can I do for you folks?" "We are looking for your wife, Sarah," Garrett said carefully. "It is about her brother, Jacob Hartwell." William's expression changed immediately, becoming wary. "What about Jacob?" Teresa stepped forward, keeping her voice low. "Mr. Kemp, my name is Teresa Fleming. I was a friend of Jacob's in Telluride. I need to speak with Sarah about something very important. It concerns Jacob's work with the newspaper." William studied her for a long moment, then called to a young man stocking shelves in the back. "Tommy, watch the store for a bit. I need to step out." He gestured for Teresa and Garrett to follow him. "Come with me." He led them through the back door of the hardware store and up an external staircase to the living quarters above. The apartment was cozy and well appointed, with lace curtains and comfortable furniture. A woman sat at a table by the window, mending a shirt. She looked up as they entered, and Teresa saw the resemblance to Jacob immediately, the same intelligent brown eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. "Sarah," William said, "these people say they knew Jacob. They need to talk to you about his newspaper work." Sarah set down her mending, her expression becoming guarded. "Jacob is dead," she said flatly. "We received word a week ago that he died in a fire at his office. Are you here to offer condolences?" "He did not die in a fire," Teresa said, her voice shaking. "He was murdered. I saw it happen." Sarah stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "What?" Teresa took a deep breath and told the whole story, from witnessing Mayor Blackthorne shoot Jacob to fleeing Telluride with Garrett's help. Sarah listened with growing horror, and by the time Teresa finished, tears were streaming down the woman's face. "I knew it," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew something was wrong. The sheriff sent a telegram saying it was an accident, that Jacob had fallen asleep at his desk and knocked over a lamp. But Jacob would never be so careless. And he had been telling me for weeks that he was close to exposing Blackthorne's corruption." She wiped her eyes. "My brother was murdered and they tried to cover it up." "I am so sorry," Teresa said. "Jacob was a good man and a good friend. He did not deserve what happened to him." "No, he did not," Sarah said fiercely, "and Blackthorne cannot be allowed to get away with it." She turned to her husband. "William, get the box." William nodded and went into the bedroom. He returned a moment later carrying a small wooden box with a lock on it. "Jacob left this with us 2 weeks ago," he said. "He said if anything happened to him, we should take it to the territorial marshal in Denver. He made us promise." Sarah unlocked the box with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were dozens of papers. Ledgers, letters, affidavits from miners who had been cheated, records of bribes paid to officials. It was everything Jacob had gathered, all the proof needed to bring down Mayor Blackthorne. "We have been trying to figure out how to get this to Denver safely," Sarah said. "William cannot leave the store for long, and I did not want to travel alone. We were going to hire an escort, but we did not know who we could trust." She looked at Teresa and Garrett. "Will you take it? Will you make sure the marshal gets this evidence?" "Yes," Teresa said without hesitation. "I promise you we will see this through. Jacob's death will mean something." Sarah embraced her, both women crying. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for caring about my brother. Thank you for being brave enough to come forward." They stayed in our array for one more night, resting and preparing for the long journey to Denver. William provided them with fresh supplies and warned them to be careful. "If Blackthorne finds out you have those documents, he will do everything in his power to stop you from reaching Denver," he said. "Trust no one until you are safely in the marshal's office." The journey to Denver took 5 days. They traveled through mountain passes and across open plains, always watching for signs of pursuit. Garrett was constantly vigilant, and Teresa found herself checking over her shoulder every few minutes, but they saw no sign that anyone was following them. Denver was overwhelming after weeks in the wilderness and small towns. The streets were crowded with people, horses, and wagons. Buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high, and the noise was almost deafening. Teresa clung to Garrett's arm as they made their way through the chaos to the territorial marshal's office. Marshal Thomas Pemberton was a stern-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He listened to their story with a grave expression, occasionally interrupting to ask questions. When Teresa finished speaking, he examined the documents from Jacob's box, taking his time to read through each one. "This is damning evidence," he said finally. "If this is all accurate, and I have no reason to believe it is not, Mayor Blackthorne is guilty of multiple crimes: embezzlement, bribery, intimidation, and murder. I will issue a warrant for his arrest immediately and send deputies to Telluride to bring him in." "What about me?" Teresa asked. "I am the only witness to the murder. Will I have to testify?" "Eventually, yes," Marshal Pemberton said. "But I will make sure you are protected. We have safe houses where witnesses can stay until the trial. No one will know your location except me and my most trusted deputies." "What if Blackthorne's connections reach even here?" Garrett asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at Teresa. "I have been a marshal for 20 years, Pemberton said. "I have dealt with men like Blackthorne before, men who think their money and power put them above the law. They are usually wrong. Colorado is becoming a state, and we are working hard to root out corruption at every level. Blackthorne will face justice. I give you my word on that." They stayed in Denver for 3 weeks while the marshal's office worked to build their case. True to his word, Pemberton arranged for Teresa to stay in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a small cottage guarded by deputies around the clock. Garrett stayed with her, refusing to leave her side even when Pemberton suggested it might not be proper. "I do not care about proper," Garrett said bluntly. "She has been through hell, and I am not abandoning her now." During those weeks, Teresa and Garrett grew even closer. They spent long hours talking about their hopes and dreams, about the future they might build together. Garrett told her he wanted to expand his ranch, maybe buy more cattle and hire some help. Teresa talked about her love of numbers and bookkeeping, how she had always dreamed of maybe teaching school someday. "You could do both," Garrett said. "We could build a bigger cabin, one with a separate room you could use as an office. You could keep books for the ranch and maybe for some of the other ranchers in the area. And if the school board in the nearest town needs a teacher, you could do that too." "That sounds wonderful," Teresa said, leaning against his shoulder. "It sounds like a real life, a good life." "It will be our life," Garrett said, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Teresa, I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. When this is all over, when Blackthorne is in prison and you are safe, I want you to marry me. I want to build that life we are talking about together. Will you consider it?" Teresa felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Garrett Jackson. I cannot think of anything I want more." He kissed her then, and it was different from their first kiss. This one was deeper, more passionate, full of the promise of a future they would build together. Word came from Telluride 2 weeks later. The marshal's deputies had arrested Mayor Blackthorne at his home. He had tried to flee but had been caught before he could leave town. Several of his associates had been arrested as well, including the corrupt sheriff. The people of Telluride, finally free from Blackthorne's grip of fear, had celebrated in the streets. Marshal Pemberton came to the safe house to deliver the news personally. "Blackthorne is in custody in Denver now," he said. "The trial will begin in 2 weeks. Miss Fleming, you will need to testify, but I believe the evidence we have is strong enough that this should be relatively straightforward." The trial was indeed straightforward, though no less harrowing for Teresa. She took the stand and told the jury exactly what she had seen on that terrible night in March. She described watching Mayor Blackthorne shoot Jacob Hartwell in cold blood, described the fear she had felt as she fled for her life. Several times during her testimony, she had to stop and compose herself, and each time she looked out at the courtroom and found Garrett sitting in the front row, his steady gaze giving her strength. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she had been mistaken about what she saw, or that she had some ulterior motive for accusing the mayor. But the documentary evidence from Jacob's investigation was too strong to ignore, and several other witnesses came forward to testify about Blackthorne's corruption and violence. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Vernon Blackthorne was sentenced to hang for murder and to serve multiple life sentences for his other crimes. As the judge read the sentence, Blackthorne finally showed emotion, his face twisting with rage as he shouted that he would find a way to make Teresa pay for this betrayal. "Remove the prisoner," the judge ordered, and deputies dragged Blackthorne from the courtroom as he continued to threaten Teresa. Marshal Pemberton approached Teresa and Garrett after the trial concluded. "It is over," he said. "Blackthorne will hang in 3 weeks and you are free to go wherever you wish. You are a brave woman, Miss Fleming. What you did here took tremendous courage." "I did not do it alone," Teresa said, squeezing Garrett's hand. "I could not have done any of this without him." That evening, they had dinner at one of Denver's finest restaurants to celebrate. Teresa wore a new dress that Garrett had bought for her, a beautiful deep blue silk that made her dark eyes shine. Garrett wore his best suit, and Teresa thought he had never looked more handsome. "What do you want to do now?" Garrett asked as they ate. "We could stay in Denver if you wanted. I could sell the ranch, find work here." "No," Teresa said firmly. "I want to go back to your ranch, our ranch. I want to start building that life we talked about." Garrett smiled. "Are you sure?" "Denver has a lot to offer. There are more opportunities here." "I am sure," Teresa said. "The ranch is your dream and I want to help you make it a success. Besides, I have had enough of big cities and crowds. I want somewhere quiet and peaceful where we can just be together." They were married 2 days later in a small church in Denver, with Marshal Pemberton serving as one of the witnesses. Teresa wore her blue silk dress, and Garrett wore his suit, and even though there were only a handful of people present, it was the most beautiful wedding Teresa could have imagined. The journey back to the ranch felt different this time. They were not running anymore, not looking over their shoulders in fear. They were going home together to start their life as husband and wife. The ranch looked even better than Teresa remembered. Spring had fully arrived in the valley, and the grass was lush and green. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and wildflowers dotted the hillsides. Garrett carried her over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing, and Teresa felt a joy so complete it almost hurt. They spent the next several months working to improve the ranch. Garrett bought 20 head of cattle using the reward money the territorial government had given them for bringing down Blackthorne's corruption ring. They fixed up the barn, expanded the chicken coop, and planted a larger garden. Teresa set up a small office in one corner of the cabin, where she kept the ranch's books, and began taking on bookkeeping work for some of the neighboring ranches. By summer, they had hired a young cowhand named Miguel to help with the cattle, and by fall, they were discussing plans to build a larger house. Life was good, better than Teresa had ever dared to hope. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Teresa turned to Garrett and said, "I am going to have a baby." Garrett stared at her for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he said. "Teresa, that is wonderful. When?" "The doctor in town thinks sometime in late April or early May," Teresa said, her face glowing with happiness. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy." Garrett set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I am over the moon. You have given me so much already, Teresa. You brought life back to this ranch, back to me. And now we are going to have a child together. I could not ask for anything more." The winter was cold but peaceful. They spent long evenings by the fire, Garrett reading aloud while Teresa knitted tiny garments for the baby. They talked about names and argued good-naturedly about whether they wanted a boy or a girl. Garrett said he did not care as long as the baby was healthy, but Teresa could tell he secretly hoped for a son to teach about ranching and cattle. As spring approached and Teresa's belly grew round, Garrett became increasingly protective. He barely let her lift anything heavier than a book and insisted she rest frequently. Teresa found it endearing, even when it was a bit smothering. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know," Garrett said, "but you and that baby are the most precious things in my life. I am not taking any chances." Their son was born on a warm afternoon in early May 1884, just over a year after Teresa had witnessed Jacob's murder and fled Telluride. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Teresa's arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. "He is perfect," Garrett said, his voice choked with emotion as he looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and gray eyes that reminded Teresa of his father. "What should we name him?" Teresa asked. They had discussed many names over the winter, but now, looking at their son, Garrett said, "What about Jacob, after your friend? He brought us together in a way. If it were not for his courage in standing up to corruption, we never would have met." Teresa felt tears stream down her face. "Jacob." "Yes, that is perfect. Jacob Garrett Jackson." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Teresa was exhausted most of the time, but she had never been happier. Garrett was a devoted father, walking the floor with Jacob when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every free moment marveling at his son. The ranch continued to prosper. They added more cattle, built the larger house they had dreamed of, and became known throughout the region as honest, hard-working people. Teresa taught Sunday school at the small church in the nearest town, and Garrett served on the local Cattlemen's Association board. 2 years after Jacob was born, Teresa gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Teresa's dark eyes and Garrett's gentle disposition, and her brother adored her from the moment he met her. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who was loud and rambunctious and kept them all on their toes. Sarah Hartwell Kemp and her husband William became regular visitors to the ranch, and the two women formed a deep friendship. Sarah said it brought her comfort to know that her brother's legacy lived on not just in the justice that had been served, but in the family that had formed because of his courage. On a spring evening in 1890, 7 years after that terrible night in Telluride, Teresa and Garrett sat on the porch of their home, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Jacob, now 6 years old, was teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the creek. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the valley was filled with the sounds of birdsong and children's laughter. "You ever think about that night?" Garrett asked quietly. "About how different our lives might have been if I had not been sleeping in that stable?" Teresa reached over and took his hand. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "I think about Jacob and how much I miss him. I think about how terrified I was, but mostly I think about how lucky I am. That night was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but it led me to you. It led me to this life, to our children, to everything I hold dear." "You know what I remember most about that morning," Garrett said. "When I first saw you in the stable, you looked so scared and lost. But there was also this determination in your eyes, this strength. I knew right then that you were someone special, and when you told me what you had witnessed, I knew I could not walk away. Some things are more important than playing it safe." "You told me to tell you when I was ready," Teresa said, "to face what had happened, to fight for justice. You gave me time to heal and find my courage. Not many men would have done that." "You were always courageous," Garrett said. "You just needed someone to believe in you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. Jacob had given up on teaching his siblings to skip stones and was now building a dam across the creek while Rose and Samuel splashed in the shallow water, shrieking with laughter. "We should probably get them inside for supper soon," Teresa said reluctantly. "In a minute," Garrett said, pulling her closer. "I just want to enjoy this moment a bit longer. My beautiful wife, our healthy children, our home. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Teresa said, resting her head on his shoulder. "This is real, this is ours, and I would not change a single thing about it." As the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Teresa thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the fear and the pain, about the terrible things she had witnessed, and the courage it had taken to come forward. She thought about Jacob Hartwell, who had died fighting for justice, and hoped that he would be proud of how his legacy had lived on. But mostly, she thought about Garrett, about the unexpected love that had bloomed in the midst of crisis and danger. He had been her protector, her partner, her greatest support. He had given her time when she needed it, had never pushed or pressured, had simply been there, steady and sure, waiting until she was ready. And she was ready now. Ready to embrace every day of this beautiful life they had built together. Ready to face whatever challenges came their way, knowing they would face them as a team. Ready to love and be loved, to raise their children and grow old together in this valley they called home. The ranch had become a place of healing and hope, where the shadow of that terrible night in Telluride had been transformed into something bright and good. They had taken tragedy and pain and built something beautiful from it. That was the real victory, Teresa realized. Not just that justice had been served, though that mattered too, but that they had refused to let violence and fear define their lives. They had chosen love instead. "Come on," Garrett said, standing and pulling Teresa to her feet. "Let us get these children fed and into bed. And then I want to sit by the fire with my wife and count my blessings." Teresa called to the children, and they came running, dirty and wet and happy. Jacob grabbed his father's hand, chattering excitedly about the dam he had built. Rose wrapped her arms around Teresa's leg, and Samuel demanded to be carried. They made their way into the house, this beautiful family that had been forged in the crucible of danger and had emerged stronger for it. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Teresa and Garrett sat together by the fireplace. He had his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth, feeling perfectly content. "I love you," she said softly. "I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Garrett said, kissing the top of her head. "You are my heart, Teresa Jackson. You and our children are everything to me." Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the promise of spring and new beginnings. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in that moment, surrounded by love and warmth and the life they had built together, Teresa knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful spreads in the region. Jacob grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who shared his father's love of the land and his namesake's passion for justice. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property where she taught not just her own younger siblings but the children from neighboring ranches as well. Samuel, true to his rambunctious nature, became a talented horse trainer, able to gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and skill. Teresa and Garrett added 2 more children to their family, twin girls they named Grace and Hope, born when Teresa was 32 years old. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together, and they brought endless joy to the household. As the children grew, Teresa found time to expand her bookkeeping business. She became known throughout Colorado as an expert in ranch accounting and finance, and her advice was sought by cattlemen from as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. Garrett always supported her work, proud of her sharp mind and business acumen. They made regular trips to Denver to visit the gravestone they had erected for Jacob Hartwell, bringing fresh flowers and telling him about their lives, about the family that had grown from the seeds of his courage. Sarah and William always joined them on these visits, and afterward they would all have dinner together, sharing stories and remembering the man whose sacrifice had changed all their lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Teresa by having a special edition of the Telluride newspaper framed. It was the first issue printed after Blackthorne's arrest, with the headline "Truth Prevails: Mayor's Corruption Exposed." The article, written by the new editor, praised Jacob Hartwell's bravery and mentioned Teresa's courageous testimony. Garrett hung it in Teresa's office, a reminder of how far they had come. "I wanted you to have something to remember that you are not just a wife and mother, though you excel at both," Garrett said as he revealed the framed newspaper. "You are also a woman who stood up for justice when it would have been easier to stay silent. You are someone who changed history, Teresa. I want our children to know that about you." Teresa cried happy tears as she hugged her husband. "Our children are lucky to have you as a father," she said. "You have shown them what a good man looks like, how a husband should treat his wife with respect and partnership. You have given them the greatest gift possible, a home filled with love." As they grew older, their love only deepened. They developed the comfortable intimacy of long-married couples who know each other's thoughts and moods without words. Garrett could tell when Teresa was worried about something just by the way she bit her lower lip. Teresa knew when Garrett was troubled by the way he would stand on the porch staring out at the mountains. When Jacob, their eldest, announced his engagement to a lovely young woman named Emma from the neighboring ranch, Teresa and Garrett hosted a celebration that brought together people from across the region. As they watched their son dance with his bride-to-be, they held hands and remembered their own beginning, so different from this joyful occasion but no less meaningful. "We have done well," Garrett said. "Look at him. He is happy and settled, ready to build his own life." "We gave him a good foundation." "We gave all of them a good foundation," Teresa agreed. "A home where they felt safe and loved, where they learned the value of honesty and hard work. That is what Jacob Hartwell died fighting for, you know. The chance for ordinary people to live good lives without fear of corruption and violence. We are his legacy, in a way. This family, this ranch, this life we built. It is proof that his sacrifice meant something." They attended Jacob and Emma's wedding 6 months later, beaming with pride as their son exchanged vows. Within a year, they became grandparents when Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Garrett cried when he held his granddaughter for the first time, and Teresa teased him gently about going soft in his old age. "I am not old," Garrett protested, though his hair was now more silver than dark. "I am distinguished." "You are old," Teresa said affectionately, running her fingers through his silver hair. "We both are, but I would not want to be young again, not if it meant giving up all the years we have had together." Rose married a young doctor who set up practice in the nearby town, and Samuel eventually wed the daughter of a horse breeder from Montana. The twins, Grace and Hope, both attended Teachers College in Denver before returning to help Rose run the school on the ranch property. The Jackson family became a pillar of their community, known for their generosity, integrity, and the strong bonds between them. On a summer evening in 1910, 27 years after that fateful night in Telluride, Teresa and Garrett sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley they loved. They were both in their early 60s now, weathered by years of hard work but still strong and healthy. The house behind them was filled with family, their children and their spouses, 7 grandchildren ranging in age from newborn to 15, and Sarah Kemp, who had become like a sister to Teresa over the years. "Can you believe it has been 27 years?" Teresa asked. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was hiding in that hayloft, terrified for my life, and sometimes it feels like a different lifetime entirely." "It was a different lifetime," Garrett said. "We were different people then. Younger, more uncertain, we had no idea what the future would hold." "Are you glad?" Teresa asked. "About how everything turned out?" Garrett turned to her with a look of such love and tenderness that it took her breath away, even after all these years. "Teresa Jackson, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Building this life with you, raising our children, growing old with you by my side. It has been the greatest privilege of my life. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Well, maybe I would have kissed you sooner." Teresa laughed and leaned over to kiss him. "Better late than never." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, surrounded by the sounds of their family inside the house. Somewhere, a grandchild was laughing. Someone was playing the piano that Garrett had bought for Rose when she was 12. The smell of fresh baked bread drifted from the kitchen. This was what they had built from the ashes of tragedy and fear. This was what love and courage and determination could create. Not just a family or a ranch or a legacy, but a life filled with meaning and joy, with connection and purpose. Teresa thought about the young woman she had been, hiding in that stable with hay in her hair and terror in her heart. She wished she could tell that frightened girl that everything would be all right, that the cowboy who found her would become the love of her life, that the nightmare she was living through would eventually fade into memory while the love would only grow stronger. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, seeing the distant look in her eyes. "About that morning in the stable," Teresa said. "About how you told me to tell you when I was ready. You gave me such a gift with those words, Garrett. You gave me time and space to heal, to find my strength. You never pushed or demanded. You just waited, patient and steady, until I was ready to face what needed to be faced." "You would have been ready regardless," Garrett said. "You had that strength in you all along. I just gave you a safe place to find it." "We gave each other that," Teresa said. "A safe place. A home. A love worth fighting for." Inside the house, someone called that dinner was ready. Garrett stood and offered his hand to help Teresa up, just as he had done thousands of times over their years together. They walked into the house hand in hand, greeted by the smiles and warmth of their family. As Teresa looked around the crowded table, at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at Sarah Kemp, who had become family in truth if not by blood, at Garrett sitting beside her with his hand resting comfortably on her knee, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had tested her in ways she never could have imagined, had thrown her into danger and forced her to flee everything she knew. But it had also given her gifts beyond measure. A love that had sustained her through every challenge, a family that brought joy to every day, and the knowledge that she had found the courage to stand up for justice when it mattered most. The meal was lively and loud, with everyone talking over each other and the grandchildren squabbling good-naturedly over who got the last piece of cornbread. After dinner, they all gathered in the large living room, and Garrett pulled out his fiddle while Samuel accompanied him on the guitar. They played the old songs, the ones Garrett's father had taught him, and everyone sang along later. When the children were in bed and the house had grown quiet, Teresa and Garrett walked out to the porch one last time. The night was clear and cool, and the stars blazed overhead with an intensity only seen in the mountains. "I hope Jacob can see this somehow," Teresa said softly. "I hope he knows that his death was not in vain, that good things came from his sacrifice. If he can see us, I am sure he is proud," Garrett said. "You honored his memory by living a good life, by fighting for justice, by building something beautiful. That is the best tribute anyone could ask for." They stood there in the starlight, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built a love that had weathered every storm. The ranch stretched out before them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. Behind them, the house was filled with the evidence of their love. Children and grandchildren, laughter and music, memories and dreams. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and faith, through hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. It was not perfect. There had been challenges along the way. Years when the cattle market crashed and money was tight, seasons of drought that tested their resilience, moments of worry when children were sick or struggling. But they had faced everything together, and their love had never wavered. "Ready for bed?" Garrett asked, putting his arm around Teresa's shoulders. "Ready," Teresa said, leaning into his embrace. They walked into the house together, closing the door on the night and the past, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, with love, with courage, and with the unshakable faith that they were exactly where they belonged.